My name is Martha Dennis, and my dad's family came to Glendale in the 1900s to homestead. My mother's family, the Varneys, homesteaded to Peoria in the early 1900s on what is now Greenway, and that was the original homestead. They couldn't get water there, so he had the opportunity to lease some property on what is now Cactus. So Grandpa leased the property and then later bought it. The Greenway property, where Cactus High School is now located, he dug a well in the 40s, and they started farming that and grew cotton. My mother and her brothers and sisters were all born on the Cactus farm and lived there. The Varney family owned the property that became known as, a lot of people called it Dogtown or Varneyville. It was Dogtown because my grandfather let the workers put up tents there and live there, and they had lots of dogs and they would bark all night long. But it was also called Oklahoma City, or because a lot of the people that came out here supposedly had come from Oklahoma. So it had a couple of names, but it was best known as the Varney Tract. And that's the property that runs along Peoria High School, and that was one reason why they called it Varney Road, or Choya as it's known today. My grandfather owned property on both sides of the road. He had a big dairy, and we used to love to go and help with the milking and feed the pigs, and raised a lot of calves. They had the big granary where they kept the grain to feed the animals. My cousins would come over from California in the summertime when we were young, and we always had lots of games going and lots of parties, and stayed all night at the Varney farm. We would play hide and seek, and the boys would block the granary, and then you had to bang on it in order to get out. When our cousins came, we were in charge of watching them because they were younger. We loved feeding the chickens, but they had a rooster that was really mean. So you had to have somebody stand at the gate when we were feeding the chickens, because if the rooster started coming, you had to run quick to get out. Helping with the milking was always a lot of fun, and I remember when they got the first milking machine, we were just fascinated. People from the churches and the farms around would gather, and Grandma Varney always had people come to her house. They sold all kinds of cleaning things that you couldn't actually get in the stores at that time. The women would buy, and the men would come and sit out under the trees, and then they always had a potluck lunch. Then on Saturday nights, they would have family and friends come, and they had people playing the guitar, the fiddle, a bass, and they would have fiddlings. And my sister and I would go in the kitchen and dance and folk dance. We lived on 75th or lateral 20 until about 1952, 53. My dad owned the Glendale Food Lockers, was a meat cutter, and worked in the meat cutting industry all his life, most all of his life. My dad became mayor of Glendale in 1959 and served on the city council for 18 years. And one of the big things they did at that time in 1961 was change the names of the streets. All of the north-south streets were laterals at that time. So they decided to take the Central in Glendale and remove that and make Central in Phoenix. Lateral 20, where I grew up and where my grandparents' family farm on Cactus, was on lateral 20, and it became known as 75th Avenue. The city of Peoria did not want to change their downtown. That's why they still have Jefferson, Washington, and all their streets in the downtown area. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, except when my dad bought the Peoria Dairy Queen and opened that, and my mother ran that for a few years. I worked there for several summers. That was the first Dairy Queen in the state of Arizona. We spent a lot of time in Peoria on the weekends. My mother was One of her best friends in high school was Tony, who had a beauty shop in Peoria. So Marvis and I got our first haircuts in a beauty shop in Peoria. We thought that was the biggest, most exciting thing in the world. We did a lot of shopping at Leonard's in Peoria and went to Saliba's Market. Peoria Women's Club was a gathering place, and my parents were real active in Farm Bureau, and so we went up to the Peoria Women's Club for a lot of the meetings, and they would have dances and square dancing. We used to go to the ball games up in Peoria because I had relatives that went to school up there. On my dad's side of the family, everybody went to Glendale High School. So there was always a rivalry when we were growing up, and my mother's loyalty was Peoria, so we had to root for Peoria and Glendale. As the boys got older and they quit wanting to farm, and as the girls got married and moved away, they didn't want to continue farming, and that was in the late 50s, early 60s. Grandpa continued to live on the farm, but he quit farming himself. Peoria farmers came, and my grandfather would lease the property to them, and they all lived there on the farm until 1970s, when they moved to Glendale and sold the cactus property. The Greenway property was sold several years before that, and that's when they started building the houses.